everyone. Welcome to July's Plant Powered Business Strategies to Grow Your Positive Impact. I'm Brieanah and I'm joined by my friend, Johanna.
Hi there.
Today, we are going to talk about everything storytelling. And if when I say that word, you're like, oh my God, what? This is who? What? No, I don't know what to do. Then this episode is for you. You don't have to be a marketer to understand what we're going to be talking about. In fact, we probably prefer that you're not, because we want to break it down, take you back to when we first learned this storytelling buzzword and the tips and tricks that we've learned along the way, so that you can implement some of those in your business right after you listen. First things first, though, when we started this series, our goal was to give back to the movement that we both love so much, to get more visibility on it, that being the plant-based movement that impacts the environment and animal rights. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping you guys up to date with things happening in the movement. If an important news story piques our interest, we're going to mention it here. If one piqued your interest, please drop it in the comments. We want this to be a dialogue and just make sure that everyone's staying informed on all the cool things that are happening, all the progress that's being made.
Yeah, we want to know.
Yeah, we do. And one that came across my inbox since our last episode that I thought was pretty cool was in West Hollywood, so in the US and California, a policy passed requiring that plant-based foods were the default at all city events. So the default, for those of you that don't know this concept, just means that think about going to a restaurant, right? The dishes will come with chicken or beef or something, and you have to say, hey, actually I'm vegetarian, could you take that off? Or I'm vegan, and just make sure that there's no egg, or whatever it is, right? You have to go the extra step. By making the veg option the default, people that would prefer to have meat have to get that extra step. So it's a little bit of a psychology thing to make the vegan option the default, because a lot of people don't even ask, right? There's actually been studies that when the vegan option is the default, people won't go that extra step. And so more vegan meals are consumed, which obviously benefits animals and the environment in the long term. So what I thought was really cool is that this policy passed at a municipality level. So governments are taking note of the trends, consumer choices. It's not just at the individual level anymore. Back in the day when you were the weird vegetarian or vegan at the table, like, oh, actually, can you take chicken off of mine, or whatever it was, and you kind of had to like whisper because you were embarrassed, right? It's not the case anymore. Governments are taking note of the changing consumer behaviors, the behaviors of their citizens, and their preferences. So I thought it was really cool and a sign that the movement's headed in the right direction. And big shout out to Mercy for Animals for working on this policy change in California. So any thoughts, Johanna?
Amazing. Like it's really huge. I know there's like, I think I've mentioned it already before, that some like universities, and I know like there's a campaign, like a bit of a similar campaign going on in Finland at the moment too. Maybe next time around I'll have more information about it and I can update. But yeah, it's amazing that big players are taking action, because it's this the industry where like that's responsible for feeding the masses of big like groups of people at a time. Like they have such such power to change. So I'm really happy to hear, and I'm not surprised that it's coming from like Hollywood or California. So, but
No, me either. And I know there are schools, like you mentioned, in other states that might be a little bit more surprising, but they're still primarily in progressive areas of the US right now. California, of course, being the leader. Yeah, no one's surprised by that, but it is still cool to see that governments are taking note. Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody has to be like the first
Yeah.
to do things. So it's like nothing to downplay at all.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to a news story from Veg Out for you guys to read more about it if you're interested. And so now, turning from a news story to storytelling, we want to get into all the tips and tricks, all the background of us learning our storytelling techniques as copywriters so that you guys can up-level your storytelling. We want this to be a casual conversation. So if anything that we mentioned about our experience you want to know more about, feel free to ask us. And we'll continue the conversation perhaps in another episode.
Yeah.
But Johanna, we were talking before, and you mentioned when you first learned about storytelling as a term of
Yeah.
art, and I'd love for you to share what you shared with me with everyone.
Yeah. All right, like I'll go back even a little bit more than what I was explaining to you. So when I was a kid and a teenager, basically before I went to university, like I was writing a lot of stories and I was reading like fiction all the time, and like I had so many pen pals. I was like writing to people all the time, receiving letters. So yeah, I got like this was like the time before the internet, so actual letters letters. And it felt like this completely like a normal part of my life, and then I realized when I was thinking about this like afterwards that somehow the university years really um like directed me to like a whole like completely different type of writing, like a very structured, very, you know, you have to like argue and, you know, all this stuff. And then I've been working as I was working as a translator before and still am. But then when I discovered copywriting and marketing, I realized that, yeah, there's this buzzword storytelling everywhere, and it seems to be this huge thing. Like you can sell with stories. Like as a marketer, you have to figure it out, and it just felt like it's something you have to know. And like we both have done the Copyposit Launchpad program, and there's a whole week or a module about storytelling, and it was so hard for me, like Bree, you know just as well as I do, that there were like this, I think 8 different kinds of like story formulas that we had to practice, like, and the whole point was just to practice, just have fun with your words and stories. And this was the first time that after my like whole uni and everything that I really had to sit down and try to write stories again. But there was like a little bit this goal, like, okay, I'm gonna like sell something with this at some point. And it was so hard. It was so, I think I managed to write like 2 of those like like exercises in the end, and I felt like they sucked big time. I don't know if they did, but probably not. But the point is that I created it into this, like as if I need to write like a short story, like a perfect short story every time, and that there's this like a right way or a wrong way. And I mean, I have a bit of this perfectionist tendency, so that might explain some of it. But it felt so sticky and tough, and this is like 3.5 years ago or something now, and I feel like only now I've like after practicing and and just giving myself time and giving myself a break, a lot of times I've started to relax with it and approach it more as just like being a human, like connecting with another human, and like writing as if you're talking to a friend, and just yeah, I feel like I'm finally starting to be friends with storytelling or or stories. But my point with this with this story is that you're not alone. If you're listening to this and you also feel like what the heck, I'll never figure this out, or I don't know what the point is. So hopefully during this conversation we can make it a, like, I'm a very practical person myself. I love examples. So at least I can share one very specific example with you about storytelling. And yeah, hopefully we can help you make sense of stories. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I love what
that's
you
the
said
long story.
about being friends with storytelling now. It
Yeah.
is such a journey. Yeah. So good. Thank you for sharing.
Why we have to make things so difficult sometimes, I don't know. But yeah. Mm.
We definitely do. And storytelling is one of those things that I've always wondered, that why do we make it so complex and complicated, right? Because the more I learn about it, the more it becomes so apparent that it's just part of human nature,
Yeah.
right? Because I read something recently that evolution has wired our brains for storytelling, and
Mm.
it's so true. Like it's just
Yeah.
innate in people to tell stories. Even
Yeah.
if you're an introvert, even if you don't have the gift of gab, right? Like you still have the power to tell storytelling. It's in who we are. I mean, think of like cave paintings and oral histories and cultures. Like we've been telling stories as humans for generations.
Yeah.
And so it just is this thing that we have. It doesn't have to be this complex, oh, I have to learn. And like you said, there is no perfect way to do it. It's powerful because we've learned that that's how we connect with people and that's how we share more of who we are.
Yeah.
Um, and so in today's day and age, it's just learning like those little tweaks and tips and tricks to make it that much more powerful. But you already have the skill. You don't
Yeah.
have to worry about like, oh, I have to learn this whole big new thing and it's scary and terrifying. And no, you've got it. It's in your
Yeah.
DNA.
Yeah.
They're
You're
just little tweaks along the way, right?
Yeah, you're human listening to this, like most likely, so you can tell stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I think makes storytelling so powerful when it comes to marketing, especially for an entrepreneur or a small business, is a lot of it we get in our head and we're like, why would someone want to buy from me? How can I actually get through and show them how awesome this thing is that I want to sell them and how it'll change their life and this will make the transformation that they've been looking for, but I don't know how to say it. That's where storytelling is the power, right? Because so much of those concerns are about the logic and the skepticism
Mm.
and the fear that we all have. And they're all those left brain things like, well, how much is it? And how long till I get my transformation? And, well, why do you have the authority to sell this to me? All those questions, right? We get bogged down in the questions as very logical beings. And the power of storytelling is to flip that. And you get past logic and skepticism, and you can get into the emotional heart of something. You can get to that sensory level of painting the picture of what the transformation is. The thing doesn't matter, right? The thing, it's just the vehicle for the transformation that the person wants in their
Yeah.
lives. And so the more that we can use storytelling to really get to that emotional level, to get to that sensory level and paint the picture for that person of this is where you're going to go and I'm going to help you get there, then the thing comes in and it's like, oh, by the way, this is how we do it.
Yeah.
And then we can get into logic. But first, you build that trust, you build that authority, and you get to their emotions and desire to really want that thing, want that transformation. And that's where the power is. And that's where entrepreneurs that are super successful, business owners that are super successful, even movements, we talk about the plant-based movement, right? They're successful because they get at the ethos of it. People that are vegan and adopted veganism very early before it was more mainstream did it for very value aligned ethical reasons that were super important to them on an emotional level,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So that's where the power is. The stories that we're telling, what kind of world do you want to leave for the next generation? That's not a
Yeah.
logical thing.
Yeah.
That's a I want to leave the world better than I found it thing.
Yeah.
So that's where
Totally.
storytelling comes in.
Yeah. Can I continue around that a little bit? It's what I was like when I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking kind of like storytelling on this like more strategic like or marketing level, copywriting level, but then exactly what you said, the power of stories in general. And I really wanted to kind of make this one point. It's maybe like nothing new, but I think it's important to like it's definitely nothing new, but I well, like want to say it anyways that like our societies and communities they're like built around narratives like stories and that influence our like beliefs like how we see the world, and it's the same about our relationship, like the human non-human animal relationship, and like our societies have so long told these stories about our relationship to other animals, which is why we are here now. And animals like are mistreated and abused and everything, like on such large scale. Like it's a lot of stories that we tell that that justify that, and but then and like the animal agricultural like industry, they're especially good at this. I mean, you could say that they're disguising lies with like pretty stories,
Mm.
like, and all these labels like free range and grass fed
Yeah.
and all kinds of things. And the flip side is that, like, I would love, I would love for us as like business owners, as like non-profits, as a movement, to really use even more stories, because we can encounter or like these stories, like the story that animals are here for humans, or the story that going vegan is like inconvenient or difficult, or that you need meat to be healthy. And I mean, I know we tell these stories, but at least for me it's helpful to like think about it, kind of like, yeah, zoom out, that it's like, okay, what is the story that the society is telling us about this thing that I have a different view on, and what's the other kind of story that I could tell. And I think that's what we're doing as a movement. Like, the more and more there are alternative stories, the stronger that appeal to people's emotions and drive their decision making, the stronger we're gonna get. So it's a really, it has a, yeah, stories have a really like massive power in the society. So I think it's very
Yeah.
good to be
I
aware of that.
Yeah. And I love what you said about how stories that shape us, so stories that are told to us by society, by culture, by government, whatever it is, but they shape our perceptions, right? It's such an important point when we're thinking as entrepreneurs, how do I tell a powerful story? What makes a good story? You have, when you think about it from how your audience is interacting with the story, or what their perspective currently is, what stories are they already telling themselves?
Mm.
And do you need to make a story shift in order to get through to them, or can you meet them where they are? When you think about it from what have people been told, so to your example of veganism, right? Like you said, the animal agricultural industry is so good at this. They've used very subtle, very small storytelling of free range and all these like evocative words that you picture humane situations that don't exist, right? And they've tricked the consumer into thinking these things. So as a plant-based business, you have to meet them where they are, but then take them on a journey and tell a little bit longer of a story about why what they've been told isn't right and what actually would meet their values, right? So
Mm.
there's a little bit more of a journey to happen, but it all starts with, where is my ideal client right now?
Yeah.
What are they seeing? What stories are they telling themselves? What stories have they been told? And then where is the in between? What stories do I have to tell along the way in order for them to see the light, if it's a movement, or for them to see that I can help get their transformation, if it's a product or a service? um, I just thought that was a really good point that I wanted to emphasize, is that our perspectives are so shaped by stories
Yeah.
already, that as entrepreneurs we have to be so aware of that as
Yeah.
we think of the stories and what would make a really powerful story for our business in order to help our clients.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's such a important point that you make about like meeting people where they're at. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
what are the stories they're telling themselves? So good to be, or so important to be kind of as aware of that as possible, or know your like the people you're trying to reach. So yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't always have to be like this big scary thing. I mean, that's a question I get as a copywriter. Is how do I know it's a good story? How do I know
Yeah.
I'm writing something that's actually going to resonate? And a lot of times, especially in animal rights, people think of the trauma that happened to an animal, like they want to tell the rescue story and how bad it was, and now the animal's saved, and that's great and it has a place. I'm not saying don't do that, but don't sell the good short either. Like not everything needs to weigh on the super sad emotions.
Mm.
You can have a balance of the successes, the behind the scenes, the impact that's been made along the way because of people's choices shifting. And this is getting a little bit into the nonprofit realm, but cause related businesses too can have this mindset of we identify as a plant-based or a vegan business or a cruelty-free business for these reasons because of this dream that we have, the mission that we have. That's a story. And you don't have to spend a ton of time and elaborating about how bad things are and pulling on heartstrings and things like that. You can focus on the successes and the change you want to bring and your mission and what your why. We talked about your why recently, right? That's a story. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of ways that you can tell powerful stories that aren't just always evoking a super strong emotion or getting people riled up. The internet's already a stressful place.
Mm.
Like you don't need to add to it if that doesn't feel aligned to you. You can
Yeah.
tell stories of hope, and that can be just as powerful.
Yeah. I think this would be a perfect time to share this one story that I was
Let's do
I
it.
thought,
Yeah. Yeah.
use like bringing up hope because it's partly especially about that. I'm just going to share my screen for people who are watching this in YouTube, and for everybody else, I'm going to read this out loud. So this is it's an email, like a weekly newsletter type email from Vegan Business Tribe from David. And so I'm going to read the story first, and then I'm going to explain why I just really love this. So, hey, Johanna.
Sure.
I was the first person in my family to go to university. I admit I took it for granted at the time, but my grandmother didn't. My grandma is the person I take after the most. I look like her physically and have the same attitude to life. The main difference, though, is my grandmother was raised on the Saskatchewan prairies in Canada. She was fiercely intelligent, but grew up in a family of farmers and settlers. And when she moved to the UK, she ran the family farm, selling fresh produce to the local community. She lived to her late 90s and said she was, in quotation marks, holding on until I've seen David in his cap and gown. She was too frail to come to my graduation, but she got to see me as the first person in the family to hold a university degree, perhaps true to her word, passed away soon after. Last weekend, I accompanied my son James to King's College, set on the banks of the Thames in central London. He's been told that as long as he gets his predicted college grades, then he'll most likely be offered a place at one of the most prestigious universities in the UK. Of course, a lot can happen in between then and now. He's very aware that his older sister Daisy made a last-minute decision to skip university and get a job, and she's just bought an Audi. And there's the very real barrier to overcome the student accommodation in central London. That's £350 a week. But it shows what change from the Canadian prairies to the banks of the Thames can happen in just a couple of generations. And I couldn't help but draw parallels to veganism too. My grandmother was born into a world where their relationship with animals was dictated by survival. But walking into the 19th century courtyard of King's College, the first thing to greet us was a Beyond Burger truck and a vegan donut stand. In fact, the majority of the food sold on the campus is plant-based. Sometimes it's hard to feel like we're making a difference, but if you keep doing what you're doing to move the vegan cause forwards in your own way, imagine what we'll see in another generation. So here is a beautiful story about David and like his mission and his family. And like I read this and I was so moved, and I'm going to explain why. So like I wanted to kind of highlight three points, like why I think this is great, like simple and like very effective storytelling, at least like for me, like from my point of view. Like the first thing is that it feels authentic and genuine. It doesn't feel like a marketing trick or hack. It's like, yeah, him sharing I think like a real thing that happened to him. And while he like draws it like or kind of ties it to his business at the end, I think it would have even, you know, worked without it. And then the second thing is it's specific. Like, so it's often like recommended that in like a good story is specific, and you could like really like use all the senses or some of them, so that the person can like or the reader can really imagine themselves in it. Like, so there, it's not like super specific, but it is like specific enough. It's like yeah, a real a real story, and not like vague or general. And then the third thing, and this is like really got me, it feels so relatable to me, and it really helped me, like it created this emotional bond to David. Like I don't really know him like personally, but like I see myself in the story. So the thing is, I'm the first person in my family to go to a high like university too, like on one side of my family, even the first person to go to high school. Like all my grandparents were farmers. Like I, like, you know, I, they had a, like my other set of grandparents had cows until I was 20 or something. It was like a big part of my life. So like as a result of reading this, like I feel so much somehow like closer to him, like, oh yeah, he gets it. Like, and even if he's not really like, he's not like selling anything here, but like I will never forget this story, or like it's very unlikely that I will. And it means I'm not gonna forget about the vegan business tribe or him. And I think kind of to like come to a conclusion, like storytelling, even if you're not directly trying to sell or persuade, or it's the connection to another human, like on a human to human level. And I think like I would love to see more like email marketing like this from vegan businesses, like because people want to know what you're up to. And the thing is that like this story, I don't know like how it resonates with you, Brie, or anybody else. Like it's unlikely that everybody will, you know, take it or like experience it exactly in the same way, but it's also not the point. Like everybody can, it will resonate with some people more than others, and everybody can like kind of take from it what, you know, what they what it moves in them. And like I'm getting like very emotional here talking about this. um and
Oh,
and I think because again, you will never talk to anybody, like everybody anyway, so then it's good to take some also, I don't know, like risks, or just like talk about your life and trust that your human experience behind your business, in your business, it's gonna like move people. So yeah, that's my kind of
ah, that's amazing. Big hugs to you. Thank you for sharing all of that and being so open on this episode. You started with a very behind the scenes episode, sorry, anecdote. There we go.
yeah.
Anecdote about how storytelling, how you learned about it, how it became powerful for you, and then you shared so much about your family. And I just really want to honor you in that. Thank you for sharing that with all of us.
Yeah.
And
No,
this story is very powerful. I'm glad that you highlighted it. Um, like you said, people resonate with people. There's always a person behind a business, and the more that you can share about your personal life, people might feel fear in doing that, but you're going to resonate with your potential customers better when you do that, right? As we talked about at the top of the show, it's in human nature to tell stories about our culture, about our experiences. It's just who we are. It's been ingrained in our DNA. So the more that we can do that, I think the more powerful our marketing becomes.
yeah, yeah,
Hey, Johanna, could you scroll up? I want to see the subject line for this. Change in just a couple of generations.
yeah.
Even that is an open loop and piques
Oh,
interest in this storytelling. I'm glad that you decided to share an email with us too, Johanna, because I think all too often businesses get caught in the trap of wanting to up their open rates. And so they start creating subject lines that might verge a little bit on the side of spammy, in order to get people to click into them. But when we're sharing stories like this, I feel like it's so important to come at this like you're talking to a friend, right? Like
Yeah.
you mentioned that tip at the top of the show, and then inbox is something personal, like a text message to your friend, right? And you're going to get better open rates when you just try to share authentically. So I really love that they took an authentic approach here. It's not spammy, it piques interest, and it relates to the story that's inside. That's something for people to keep in mind too as they're figuring out tips to share their stories and to become a better storyteller. When you're thinking of subject lines or what to put in the graphic for a caption on social media, that's just that high level one liner in different places, different placements throughout your business. Try to think of, how can I pique interest, tell the story, but in a really authentic and genuine way. Um, Today's consumers are so uh, keen on sniffing out the BS, that they are going to see through it, and they're going to know when you're actually telling them the truth. They're going to know when you're actually trying to resonate with them versus spamming them versus just wanting a sale. Because what I think this person also did really well with their story is they tied it back to the movement and their business in a really genuine and subtle way, where the
Yeah.
story was able to shine, but they were still able to bring up their business and still tie it back to what they do. So it wasn't, let me tell you this very personal story and then, okay, bye. It is still a sales email, but it doesn't feel like one.
Yeah.
You are just talking to them, and then you sneak in how it's tied to your business. And I think they did it in a really, really skilled way that a lot of people could learn from, as they were thinking about how to tell stories. Because
Yeah.
I think the other trap is people either go super spammy or they go too authentic, and then someone reads it and they're like, wait, why did I just read that? Like, I don't know why you're telling me this. You can always tie it back. And yes, there is a place for content that is just personal, just sharing about who you are, just resonating with people. But the more often you can tie it back to who you are and build your brand around it, the stronger a story becomes for your business. Great example. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I was wondering, do you have like what's your like uh, some of your favorite stories, or like situations or cases where you use stories in your own marketing or for clients? Do you have any
Yeah.
tips, like what
Hmm.
favorites or what you found like fun or that works
Yeah.
well?
Yeah, I think one that I tend to lean into quite a bit in what I do. I write for nonprofits and
Yeah.
businesses, just as a reminder to our listeners. But I think it works in both cases. It's a technique called future pacing.
Yeah.
Um, Especially when we were talking about this a bunch before, the movement is headed in the right direction, right? But what does that direction look like? What's ahead? So future pacing allows you to paint the picture for the change that you're working towards or that you support. This goes back to when you create your why you do what you do, your future pacing for the world you want to create. Like, anyone that created a vegan friendly business didn't just do it because they woke up one day and they're like, I'm going to create vegan stuff. Like, they have a deeper tie to it. Um, for example, at the farmer's market, I met a woman who created a whole vegan bakery business because her husband loves sweets, but he found out that he was dairy intolerant,
Mm.
not even vegan. But she went down the rabbit hole of, I want to serve my husband, like I want to give love to my partner in this way. And I'm creating all these delicious dairy-free treats that I know other people are going to enjoy. And she created a whole business out of it. Right. And so there's a whole story that it was created out of love. It was, she learned that she really enjoyed baking. So the point in sharing about this woman who found inspiration in something that she was going through in her own life was she wanted to create a future where her husband, who loves sweets, could enjoy them again. She wanted to see that happiness in her partner. Did she know what it looked like when she first started? No. And she told me all of this. I'm not just making this
Yeah.
up for this person, um, but she had this vision, right, of what she wanted her husband to be able to enjoy, what she wanted their life to be able to be like, so that as a family they could have birthday cake and he could still enjoy it, right? Um, so it doesn't have to be anything super huge, like we want all animals liberated. Yeah, of course, that would be amazing. But if that seems super intimidating for you to use as a why and a mission and a little too big for people to understand, take it down a notch, take it down to the personal level and tell this intimate story about your family to your customers.
Yeah.
I will always buy sweets from her at the farmer's market because she told me this story. And I was so moved by it that she was so motivated to bring joy to her family in this way. And now she's letting other people benefit from that joy. I think that's a really cool future pacing thing that now we've seen come to fruition where she solved the problem, but now her future pacing story can expand of where she wants to take the business next, how many other families she wants to impact, right? So it can continue to grow and evolve, but future pacing in general is a tool that I kind of lean into quite a bit, either at the broader movement level or even at the personal story level. What
Yeah.
about you?
I like it too a lot, and I feel like it feels somehow very, I don't know, natural or logical for us, or like for me, this like movement that we're part of, because we are very like focused in a better, like more ethical, beautiful, like sustainable future. So kind of painting that picture, it feels really good and feels
Yeah.
right. Um, so it's also said that well, there are different kinds of stories, and yeah, there's not one right or wrong, but it is often said that in a good story, there's a but, or like some sort of an
Mm.
obstacle, because otherwise a story can be a bit like, how kids tell stories, and then this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. Like it can be cute, but it might be more difficult to remember it, because like I guess somehow our brains attach themselves, or our mind is interested in the obstacle or the little drama or but. So I like to think about this also often when I write stories or copy or emails or whatever. Like what's the kind of, where's the friction here or the obstacles?
Yeah.
I think it's helpful for me to keep in mind.
I love that you brought up friction, um, because there is, often people get bogged down in like the pain and the struggle, and I think friction is a really good way to describe it,
Mm,
because then we kind of package it as okay, and we're moving on. If we think of any good like superhero story, there's always a moment of friction, but then they go on to save the world or whatever it is, rescue the kitten, like there's always a resolution to it, and the friction is just a stop along the way. And so I feel like that is a very good term to use for people as they're writing their stories to keep in mind, like they know where the story is going to end up because they've experienced it, right? But how to convey it is it's a stop along the way. There's some friction, and then we continue on the path. So if we think about it as a formula, there's a formula that's used a lot in marketing called the hero's journey.
mm,
Um, so any superhero story that our listeners might be familiar with usually follows this status quo friction moment and resolution where the hero wins or something is brought to conclusion. So that's kind of a template that people can keep in mind as they're formulating experiences that happen to them, is to not spend too much time in that moment of pain or that friction or that struggle, what's happening, but to bring it all the way through. And as we're talking about formulas and things that people can keep in mind, not everyone feels like they're like writing comes naturally to them. So I do want to leave our listeners with some tips that they can think of. We started talking about some formulas here and some structure to the stories, but do you have any other last tips for people as they're sitting down to write their stories, things that they can keep in mind to make sure that they're keeping their stories powerful? And
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on like specificity again, and I kind of like a little bit from a different angle. So I think I wanted to like say that I think often like people like are kind of vague or general in their writing because it feels safer somehow.
Mhm.
But the kind of like downside to that is that it's not so great for our brain. Like our brain really loves details and specificity, and there's like more action or like engagement in our brain when we read a story or hear a story that's more specific. So I wanted to share an example because this really helped me understand it. So like here's like alternative A. I like music. And then alternative B, I like melodic black metal that makes me feel like I'm taking part in a sacred ritual. That would be like,
Oh,
and it's like feel how it feels different, like in the body and the mind. So it's just working with our biology. And you anyways, like everybody knows how to be specific. Like if you again I bring up this talking to a friend example, like when you explain something to a friend, you're most likely specific, kind of naturally. So no need to make it more complicated, but it's this really helped me
yeah.
to share it.
I love that. And building off of that, my last tip would be to think about how you can integrate storytelling in everything you do. It doesn't have to be an email like Johanna shared, where it's a
Yeah,
whole story of an email. As you just shared in that example of the music, they added unique words that told the story of what type of music and evoked emotion around what it would feel like to hear and experience that music. So even if it's just a social media caption and you only have energy for one line and it's the sun was shining, okay, but the sun was shining and you could feel it on your skin and you were glad because your skin was moisturized, with a very protective sunscreen, and you can just tell everything in one sentence and add to the story. Was the breeze blowing? Were the birds chirping? Like really paint the picture for people. It doesn't have to be this huge novella, right? It can just be adding a few words to put them in your
yeah,
shoes of experiencing that sunny day. So we've talked a lot about formulas and shown examples and talked a lot about longer form storytelling, but at the end of the day, if you're just getting started and you want to make your writing for your business overall a little bit more impactful, think of how you can really distill it down and make everything you do just a little bit more impactful with storytelling terms. Don't get bogged down in telling long-winded stories. It's okay if you're already doing that. I don't want to belittle your efforts, but if you are overwhelmed, start small and just start adding those emotionally evocative words that will really resonate with your readers.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. And yeah, no such thing as perfect, so don't let that hold you down. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this was a super fun conversation. We could continue talking about storytelling all day long, but we promise to keep these around 30-40 minutes, so we will not talk your ear off for the rest of the afternoon. If, however, you start writing your stories and you have questions for us, please feel free to reach out. We now have an email address specifically for the podcast. So if you have questions for either of us about an episode or about the copy that you're writing, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to field those. And we're happy to interview you on a future episode. We're happy to answer your questions on a future episode. Again, this is for the movement, for supporting businesses that are making a difference. Want this to be as much of a conversation as it is a learning experience for all of our listeners. So thank you so much, and we will be back next month with a fresh episode. Till then, bye.
Bye. Thank you.